too much of something is always, I guess, a precarious and can be potentially like destructive thing. I think I just was like overwhelmed with this kind of comparison and just assuming that I was failing at life because I was, obviously we all upwardly compare. And, we're not only just comparing ourselves to, our friend down the road, but now we're comparing ourselves to the entire world. And I just generally don't think the human brain was ever created to hold this much information. I got told by a friend of mine, she said, exercise in the way that your life isn't. So if your life is really intense, make sure that your exercise is gentle.
Oh, and so good.
And I was the opposite. I was like, intense life, trying to set up a company, like I've got to work hard. The concept that just made so much sense to me was psychological flexibility. This idea that, and I think Shakespeare said it, nothing's good or bad, just our thinking makes it so.
Doctor's Kitchen. Recipes, health, lifestyle. You've done your TED Talk, which I thought was brilliant 5 years ago, kind of prophetic, because you were talking about vines. In 2016, you're talking about vines and the amount of time that we spend on average on our phones. I think at the time it was like an hour and a half. Now it's like 3-4 hours or something. It's become a lot worse in terms of like how homogenized we are with our digital devices. And through that, obviously your app and stuff, you do a lot of things. So my first question is, how do you put into practice what you talk about and what you do on a daily basis?
That is probably the $1 million question. That is such a good question, because I would say that everyone I've met in this kind of work, which is talking about healthy mind habits, whether that be meditation to spending time off technology, and you realize it's so much easier to say than to do. And so even in 2015, I think, when I started realizing how addictive Instagram was, and I did that TED Talk, which I look back on the other day, I thought, wow, 6 years ago and nothing's changed. We're still, if not more addicted than we were. And even though most people know that it has detrimental consequences to their mood sometimes. So for me, I think it's really important that I slow down, because when I get into a cycle, and I definitely think I'm a bit vulnerable of it now because the pandemic is easing, and so suddenly old schedules are coming back or trying to come back, I would say. And I'm having to really consciously choose what I say yes to and what I say no to, and no wasn't in my dictionary like for a long time. So no is something I'm really learning. I'm a recovering people pleaser, and it's when I get too fast that's when I get into bad habits again, and I wake up to Instagram and I go to sleep with catching up on emails. And so it's when I slow down, I have the time to go, actually, you know what, you don't get a good night's sleep when you're on Instagram or when you're doing emails just before you go to sleep. Like put the phone down, get the book out, get the journal out or whatever, and just go back to these things I know support my well-being better. But yeah, the speed of life is a big factor.
Yeah, huge. I mean, like for me, I'm a classic people pleaser as well. I'm so glad you said that. I wrote an article, I wrote a couple of paragraphs in my newsletter recently about people pleasing and the power of saying no. And I've been trying to exercise this a lot more recently. And the freedom it gives you, that block in your diary that is now open, and where you can actually start practicing the things that you talk about all the time, or just having a walk, or listening to a podcast that's very relaxing. Like, that is infinitely more positive for you and other people around you as well. So the power of saying no is so important. And I'm guilty of not doing it enough myself.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I have a friend called Adam Robinson, and he kind of predicts, I guess, the future in some ways, kind of a behavioral kind of analyst. And he always says that in life, things are either poisons or elixirs, that they can't ever be neither. And it's so interesting, like something either makes you better or makes you worse. And I think Instagram for me is that it's like better. Okay, I get to catch up, maybe I kind of receive some news there, maybe I get a bit of inspiration, maybe I'm learning about something that's happening culturally. And then, okay, is it becoming a poison? And in that moment I have to got to really like pull it back. And it's
Yeah.
kind of the same with people. I find that, you know, people we spend time with are either kind of slightly poisons or elixirs. Like, do they make us feel really good afterwards, or do you kind of leave going, oh my god, should I have said that, should I have said this, like, oh, what do I mean by this, or whatever. And that kind of like feeling of anxiety. And I've been trying to kind of explore that, kind of just again like consciously going, did this make me feel better, or did this make me feel worse? And
Mm.
slightly just kind of like chipping away at life, creating one that makes me mostly feel good.
Yeah, yeah. It's a kind of a precarious relationship that I have with social media because on one hand, it's the reason why, I mean, it's the reason why this podcast exists in its entirety. Is the reason why I wrote my books and all that kind of stuff. So I've got so much to be thankful for it. But at the same time, you're right. It's, you know, how much you dedicate yourself to it, how much you allow yourself to be influenced by it. And with the current state of algorithms and what is being shown to us on a constant basis, we have to really recognize how to use it even more so today, because you can find yourself going down into rabbit holes and comparisons and fear of missing out and all these sort of things that have now seeped into our vernacular because of social media.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you know, too much of something is always, I guess, a precarious and can be potentially like destructive thing. And that's what I definitely, that was my experience and really led to quite chronic mental health issues. Actually, I think I just was like overwhelmed with this kind of comparison and just assuming that I was failing at life because I was, you know, obviously we all upwardly compare. And you know, we're not only just comparing ourselves to, you know, our friend down the road, but now we're comparing ourselves to the entire world. And I just generally don't think the human brain was ever created to hold this much information. So I think we are suffering from infoxication, that kind of the too much information being fired at us.
Mm.
And also I always have to remind myself that Instagram is a pinprick, because it is that, as we know, it's that snapshot. But yeah, we've got no idea what's happening in the rest of their lives. Like, and I find this like with life in general. I like life is like snakes and ladders. Like somebody might be, you know, they may have like landed on a square that's a ladder up, you know, up 10 squares, but then, you know, you've just landed on a square that's a snake and you're down five, but then suddenly you've got no idea in a week if you're going to hit a snake. And I find that Instagram kind of like stops that, you know, game board in its tracks every single day, and we kind of
Mm.
compare ourselves to something that's constantly moving. So it's bizarre that we do it, but we all do.
Yeah, yeah, I love those two analogies, the snakes and ladders, and what I've noticed actually is people are warming a lot more, at least in my little bubble on Instagram, because everyone's in their own little bubble and their own sort of, you know, echo chamber. But certainly, what I'm seeing people warm to is the authentic nature, the unfiltered aspects of people's life. Like I've put some posts up whilst I was working. In ITU and A&E during the pandemic, of me just like snacking on Haribos, you know, and there's something, and then people are like, oh my God, he eats like unhealthy food. Like, of course I eat unhealthy food. I mean, you know, it's there at the end of the ward, and everyone's like stressed out in their minds and they just need to eat on the go and stuff. Like, this is reality. And I think showing reality on a platform that has been traditionally used to demonstrate aspirational qualities of life or where you want to get to, I think is breaking the mold, and people really do respond to that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. We are definitely seeing a shift in how people are using that platform. But it's the other thing, is Instagram is highly contagious, because
Mm.
fear is, as we know, emotions are so contagious. So it is a precarious thing because we open it up and we've got no idea what content we're going to see. And that is the addictive nature of it, because are we going to receive that validation that's going to kind of mess with our brain chemistry and make us feel good, but then also make us feel bad? Are we going to be, you know, given a positive quote, or are we going to be given, you know, a potential post of us feeling like we missed out on a friend's gathering or something? And that kind of like the unknown and the unpredictability of it is is something that I think it's definitely confusing for the human mind. So the other thing I kind of try to do is like make sure that I'm in a good place before I go on this platform, because then it means I can, you know, observe any sort of content with managing my kind of emotional relationship with it.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if you've heard recently, but China have banned gaming for more than a certain amount of time for under 18-year-olds during the week, and then I think it's like a maximum of 3 hours at the weekend. Like it's a pretty hefty ban, and I wonder if they're actually onto something. Like my first reaction was, oh my god, that's so authoritarian, you know, this is like very typical of a dictatorial state. But actually, are they actually investing in the mental health of the younger people? And it's almost like, you know, because we know Instagram and social media are drugs essentially, we need like that bartender who knows when we've had too much and advises us not to have any more. We almost need that sort of virtual barrier there. Like, I wonder what your opinions on that are.
I think I probably share the same as you in the sense that initially you're like, oh gosh, that feels quite kind of like parental state-esque. But at the same time, there is also I know there's clinics being set up in China to help people get off game addiction.
Mm.
And and also I guess there's been no regulation for the creators of these games either. So I'm not sure where the regulation should lie. Should it lie with the people that are creating it?
Mm.
Because or should it be with the consumer, especially under 18-year-olds? And I think it's become, from what I know, I don't have children, but with my friends who are parents, it's become a real struggle in managing their children's gaming habits and putting boundaries, you know, and it's causing such frictional relationships where, you know, there's constant fights because a lot of these games are social too. So you don't want to
Mm.
stop your child from socializing if this is the way that they're expressing themselves. But at the same time, you obviously want them to explore lots of different parts of the world and be outside and get all the benefits of like getting vitamin D. So
Mm.
I can see it's a real contentious thing gaming, but you're right. I mean, maybe this is a great step for the government to protect mental health, but I guess it's really difficult to kind of like say one policy for everyone because we are all so different with our mental health. There's some people, I'm sure, and also there's now some people making money from gaming. So again, are they restricting people's
Yeah.
ability to make money? I mean, it's a really delicate and I'm sure kind of highly complicated matter. But from a mental health standpoint, anytime we can take ourselves off technology is good because there's just so many benefits to being outside and being active.
Yeah, I listened to a bunch of podcasts with a whole bunch of techies who have been in the industry for years, and they're parents now. And unanimously, they're always like, yeah, we don't allow our kids to use social media at home. We have very clear limits on the amount of time that they can spend on the internet. And even in that program that you might have seen on Netflix, I think it was called The Social Dilemma, they did like this little Q&A with some of the creators of the like button from Facebook and a whole bunch of other, and they were like, oh yeah, no, we don't allow our kids to go on social media at all. So there's this sort of like recognition amongst the creators of the platforms that this is not good. And they're being very strict about it, but with everyone else, it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, I don't think we appreciate the potential negatives, particularly at such an influential age. And even at an adult age, I'll be honest, a lot of the news is it's focused on negativity because that's what sells. We are basically products of what we are more likely to click on, which is why in certain news sites, you know, it will show generally negative news. And that trains our neural networks to be more alert and a lot more, basically like a heightened anxiety response. And that's why I've actually stopped looking at news sites myself and actually only looking for positive news cycles, you'll be generally aware of what's going on because people are going to tell you. But I'm actually trying to train my own neural networks to be a lot more responsive to the positive aspects of what's going on in the world. I wonder if that's something that you do yourself, or how you tolerate the news.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. Our subconscious brain, I think, is we don't realize how much we're receiving all the time from the world around us. And the fact that, we've now moved from physical threats into psychological threats, and the kind of like brain processes that were, brilliant in helping us stay safe from physical threats, like running away from lions and tigers, are now being so overactivated, and our emotional system is being completely hijacked by the psychological threat of the news. For example, if you just look at very recently the incredibly sad news about Sarah Everard, and the fact that there's now so much media around kind of women being safe on the streets. Now, I obviously want to take into account that the world isn't the world isn't completely safe, but at the same time, I also want to take into account that you can follow one news agenda, like just following news about Sarah, and my belief system could change into the world is scary, and then my confirmation bias moves into trying to find evidence at all times to confirm my belief state that the world is scary. And I think when I started to understand how the brain works, from our belief system is really the filter of how we interpret reality, and that can make the world more scary if we want it to be. But also, if we set our belief system to say, okay, obviously there are tragic things that can happen, so keep your eyes peeled, but on the whole the world is safe, I have a much more enjoyable interpretation of reality. So I think it's really important for us to constantly ask ourselves, like, what is the news making me believe? And is it the whole truth, or is it a part of the truth that I am then taking into the whole truth? And to know how vulnerable we are. For example, everything that unfolded with Afghanistan, I became glued to it, absolutely glued to it. And I didn't sleep for days because I was like, because it was the first time in history we were really watching something unfold in real time. I could go onto Twitter and I could watch civilians' videos, and it was literally like we were in our own worst movie. And I thought to myself, wow, can our brains hold this? And again, like, trauma is contagious. Because of course we're social creatures. So I think, and I really had to make sure that I took a day off following this world crisis, just to remember that actually there was nothing I could do and sitting in London. And if you're kind of a highly sensitive person like I am, or an empath, or someone that kind of like deeply like feels other people's emotions, I think it's even more important to know that about yourself, and then to also to know when your ability to change things, like where the edge, and the edges are blurry, but kind of being lost in the emotion of it is not necessarily helpful for them or you.
Yeah, I think that's so eloquently put. Especially the things you said about confirmation bias. It's quite unfashionable, I think, today to say that we live in a relatively safe world. It's got infinitely more safe over the last few decades, but if you look at the news cycle, you'll be convinced of the exact opposite. And the real-time nature of being able to witness what's going on. And of course, I think we're quite naturally voyeuristic creatures, which is why we're addicted to like reality TV and stuff. And we love following people and spying on their every move, like through our phones and stuff. It's no wonder that we have this obsession, and it can create negative spirals. I know that from myself as well. I have to like constantly stop myself by taking like enforced 15-minute breaks whenever I'm on social media.
Yeah, there's a great quote where emotion goes, attention flows. So if we were sitting in a restaurant and somebody started shouting, immediately the entire restaurant would be looking at it. And so that is why, if you look at EastEnders, for example, or reality television, there is so much emotion. So as a consequence, we're glued. But emotions are really important. But when we're driven by them, feeling them, and that's what I write about in my book a lot, feeling them is critical, acting upon them is not. And I think sometimes the news can heighten our emotions, kind of like make us feel very aroused. And then does that mean we are short with the person that spills coffee over us? Does that mean that we're more likely to get into confrontation? Does that mean that we are just on those kind of, again, like edges of heightened emotional states, and it turns us into like emotional creatures rather than rational creatures? And I think that point is where my work has definitely been like very focused. And how do we kind of like use all the wisdom that we have within us, rather than being too much driven by emotion?
Yeah, I really want to talk about your book actually, but before we do that, can we talk a bit about your upbringing and how emotions or thoughts were sort of brought up in your family environment? Was that something that you were quite open about, or is this something that you've had to learn yourself as you grew older?
So I grew up in an odd environment, I guess, because on the one hand, my mom was a psychotherapist, and on the other hand, my dad had chronic stress, anxiety, and, experiences of depression. So it was this kind of like, I guess, almost like an experiment, because my mother would try out all these different like tools and tips, to help manage my father, who is the ultimate, as I call him, like stiff thinker. Like it's not going to work and kind of until it does.
Yeah.
And my mother is a lot more kind of like open-minded. And so, even before she was doing her psychotherapy, like I remember when we were really young, she was like a Reiki healer. So she was like interested in energy, and she would
Nice.
Reiki heal our animals. And I think that was when I realized the power of energy in our ability to heal, when you see Reiki healing on animals, because animals can't lie. They can't go just to make you feel good. Yeah, this feels really nice. I feel relaxed. Animals are either relaxed if they feel relaxed or not if they don't. And we had this parrot, which was a really bizarre choice, I think, of my little brother. He wanted a parrot like for years. And so finally my parents were like, all right, we'll get a parrot. Um, and I remember this parrot would just like squawk the whole time. My mother would just like bring her hands just slightly around this parrot, and he would just fall to sleep, just close his eyes and be totally zen. And that was really interesting to kind of to see. But I think like with a lot of parents and kids, even though your parents are talking such great advice and they're giving you such wisdom, you do not listen until you are kind of forced to listen, often by life circumstances, that suddenly you
Mm.
go, what did you say? Like, ah, oh, shit, I should have followed that years ago. And so I kind of almost followed in the same footsteps as my dad, and it was this super hard work ethic that we were really conditioned by. It was like, if you can work hard, work harder. And so that was like very much like the method, like kind of like what we were taught as kids. Like,
Mm.
dad works really hard, dad works really hard. And so at 12, I just was like, I almost became a workaholic. I would revise longer than any hour I could, find any hour under the sun to just like work, work, work. Because in my eyes, that was my route to like freedom, acceptance, like, financial stability. But that taken again to an extreme is really what we were saying at the beginning of this podcast. Like,
Mm.
look, working hard can be an elixir, that can be great, but when taken to extremes, like with anything, it can turn into an addiction, and it can turn to be highly detrimental. And that's what happened to me. I mid-20s had a total crash. So I think hopefully that answered your question
Oh
about
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
like
no,
childhood.
definitely.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the crash. Can you speak on that a bit more? Actually, I mean, I think it'd be really helpful actually for people to understand what you went through and how you managed to come out of it.
Well, I kind of just got to a point of absolute chronic exhaustion. And again, my brain wouldn't even recognize I was tired. It was my body that gave up on me. And
Mm.
I was so extraordinarily bloated and for months, and it was so painful. And yet, um, I just even kind of like refused to even look at that. I'd like totally disconnected my mind and my body. And this was really my route to why I got started in this work, because I was so fixed on achieving my goals that I kind of my immune system crumbled, and I ended up being really sick and lost energy for not just a week. And I'm a high energy person, but this was like 8 months. I could barely focus on an email. It was, I almost got terrified of my emails because it caused such a cortisol stress overload. And when you do get to the point of, like, I guess kind of chronic exhaustion and almost a bit of a breakdown, it surprised me how long it took to heal, and how much it actually really took me to slow down, because we get set in our ways. Um, and so yeah, that was kind of like happened like mid 20s, and I'm in a way grateful for it happening at such a young age, because it
Yeah.
forced me to then go, shit, what did my mom say? She told me to slow down, and actually really learn these psychotherapeutic tools to change how I was thinking and approaching life.
Yeah, your mum sounds amazing. Her name's Pippa, is that right? Yeah, yeah. Pippa sounds amazing. Just reading a bit about her and stuff, and how much influence she's had on not only on you but also the app and everything else as well, which is brilliant. There's a couple of things I wanted to bring up actually. So when you were talking about Reiki, I remember when I was working in a pediatric hospital down in Brighton, we had an incredible ITU consultant. I forget his name now. I should really reach out to him again, because I'd love to talk to him about this, because at the time I hadn't gone through my own medical issue that led me down the path of looking at food as medicine, mindset medicine, sleep as medicine, etc., and all the other lifestyle interventions that we have. And I remember he would arrange for a Reiki healer to come in to the HDU, which is the high dependency unit of the children's hospital that I was working at. And he would offer to the parents, who were stable kids, they weren't on oxygen machines or anything, but stable, would you like a Reiki healer to come in? And, they'd spend a bit of time, they don't touch the children, they just, put some music on and some relaxing sounds. And a lot of the parents loved it, and they felt so much, and it not just energy, they felt lifted, they felt like they were being listened to, they felt like they were getting more than just the medicine, which is obviously very important. And I remember having a chat with him about the evidence behind it. It was like, look, there isn't any evidence about it. There isn't too much, but the belief system is so important. And it brings me to how your stress was related to your immune system, and how that was the result, resulted in bloating, resulted in a whole suite of other symptoms that we don't really think about from the perspective of our mind and how powerful our minds are. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because I get a lot of people asking me, particularly as my persuasion is food, what can I eat for bloating? How do I get rid of this symptom? A lot of the time, psychological insults are the root of what their physical ailments are. And I think, that anecdote is really testament to that.
Completely. I mean, I learned it the hard way too. And I tried to follow every diet, and I tried, everything. And then another thing, that on the surface you go, well, that's really good to be exercising all the time. But me doing HIIT exercise, really intense exercise, was the worst thing that I could have done for my bloating, because it was just even more stress I was putting under my body. And so one of the things I've definitely learned in the last kind of 6 years since I really kind of had that experience was low intensity exercise and walking and slowing down. And I got told by a friend of mine, she said, exercise in the way that your life isn't. So if your life is really intense, make sure that your exercise is gentle.
Oh, that's so
And
good.
and I was the opposite. I was like, intense life, trying to set up a company, to like, I've got to work harder. Like, yeah, I can, what, you want me to be there at 3 a.m.? Absolutely, I'll be there. And like, oh, it means I only got 2 hours sleep. No, I can do that. I can do that. People pleaser plus workaholic. Oh my God, recipe for a disaster. Yeah, so the low intensity exercise and breath work, and again, these things that I would eye roll, like, oh, can't be that helpful. And I remember I went to this breathwork class, and oh God, I cried for like 7 hours after doing it. And I thought, God, this is really odd. Like I was just breathing. Why am I crying? This is so strange. And they said, 40 years of therapy in 40 minutes in these really intense breathwork classes. And it inspired me so much. So I trained to be a breathwork instructor. And that was then when I started to learn that only through diaphragmatic breathing, so belly breathing, do we actually start stimulating our digestion again? And I suddenly realized that because I'd been so much in my fight and flight, so much in my, I'm under psychological threat, like all day, every day, rather than just kind of a little bit of stress, because as you know, you can speak far better to this. A little bit of stress is good. But when it's all the time, my digestion was like, why would we digest food if we're running away from a lion? We're just gonna not digest our food.
Yeah.
And it's pretty painful after a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Everything is sort of in balance, but we like to pigeonhole things into binary attributes, like exercise is good, ergo I'm going to do as much exercise as possible. Actually, everything has to be in balance and flow. It's like the concept of plant hormesis. So when you consume turmeric, for example, you're actually eliciting a mild inflammatory response, and that the response of your body is actually generally an overall anti-inflammatory, which is why it has an anti-inflammatory effect. So it's just this lovely balance of how a little bit of harm can actually do us good. It's like exercise in itself. So you're actually, during the process of exercise, you're causing muscle shearing. That's actually a very pro-inflammatory thing that you're introducing. However, the overall benefit over time is anti-inflammatory, and it actually creates resilience. And so it's a concept that I think more people need to understand, to really hone. And then once you understand that, then you realize, okay, it's like not too much, not too little. It's the middle way. It's very Buddhist, I guess.
So true. And it's a daily practice for us to kind of tune in with ourselves and our body. And our current world that's telling us to kind of like do, go, go, go is like often the opposite of just like be and flow. And that's been a big learning. How do I move from go, go, go to flow, to kind of like realize when it feels good or feels too much.
Yeah.
And sadly, pause and slowing down is the only option.
Yeah, I know. I found it was so easy. I want to talk about this concept, so the concept of being psychologically bendy, and the flex that you write about. Tell us a bit about that, because I love the visual of that almost. It's my brain is like being plastic in it, because it is plastic. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so when I was writing the book, it was kind of, how do I take the last 6 years of research, speaking to just world experts on how I can live a psychologically healthier life. And the concept that just made so much sense to me was psychological flexibility. This idea that, and I think Shakespeare said it, nothing's good or bad, just our thinking makes it so. And when you look into kind of like how the brain works, we get stuck in thinking patterns. And one I kind of shared, with you during this podcast and for the listeners, like I got stuck in the thinking pattern that working hard was essential. And there was no movement, or there was no kind of like bendiness in that. That was my belief system, and that's what I did. Like, and another kind of like very stiff thinking is looking at the news, like the world is dangerous. And then we get stuck in that belief system, the world is dangerous. And then suddenly our confirmation bias is on overload, trying to find all the different pieces of evidence to confirm the world is scary. And so this idea of flexible thinking, and the flex method, is to break the habits of stiff thinking that we have adopted from maybe our early childhood memories, our early childhood experiences, but also we can adopt kind of stiff thinking in all different times in life. And and nothing is absolute. And this is nothing new I'm saying. Like this really comes from the work of Dr. Stephen Hayes and acceptance commitment therapy, and gosh, like William James, like the beginning of the 20th century, when they looked when we have fixed expectations for life, like life has to be like this, we kind of like cause ourselves so much pain, because when life diverges from the expectation we had for it, in that gap, our emotion rises. And that is often the trigger for our inner critic to go, see, you're not good enough, because if you were, you would have got that job. You're not good enough. Otherwise, see, that person wouldn't have broken up with you, or you're not good enough because you would have got this. And whatever the gap between expectations and reality is where often our kind of like uber negative beliefs can fill. So flexible thinking is about being constantly bending. It's like a constant flow. It's like having ultimate acceptance of what happens, but also set intentions, like go for goals, but then be bendy with whatever happens.
Yeah. I know you had a conversation with Mo Gauda a couple of episodes ago on your podcast, and he talks about the happiness equation being the difference between perception versus reality, your perceived levels of happiness compared to what your understanding of reality of your happiness is, and how that the disconnect is the root cause of whether you are happy or unhappy. And I think that really does speak to that. And it's basically about changing your perceptions of what the present is and being aware of that. Which I think is fantastic. I mean, how do you introduce this? Like, what are some of the exercises that you do personally, or that you've heard work for other people, that you can instigate on a daily basis?
Yeah, so the first person who ever came up with that equation was this guy called William James in the early 20th century. And what I find incredible is that all this incredible research that was done, and like all of these observations made. And I love Carl Jung as one of the best kind of like, I think, early psychoanalysts, and what he kind of like said about, our psyche. And so the flex method, which I write about in the book, to help us become bendy, help us to kind of minimize that gap between reality and expectations, is through 4 steps. And the first one is connection, the second one is curiosity, third is choice, and fourth is commitment. Would it be helpful to go through some of those steps?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so like the connection step is something I've kind of spoken to for a lot of this episode, which is like, how do we reconnect the mind and the body? Because within that step, we're able to feel our emotions, which is absolutely critical, because our emotions have so much wisdom, but we then give ourselves that pause so we don't have to act on them. Because when we're driven by emotion, we're driven by like the most primitive version of ourselves. But feeling them is, as I said, like is the first step to be able to access like our wise brain, the rational brain, which is like, like the brain that we really want to be working out of. And so I use the diffusion technique, which comes from acceptance commitment therapy, which is just a small sentence like, today my mind feels, and then you label how you feel really honestly. And I just love this. It's so simple. You remind yourself today, you remind yourself emotions are just temporary. You say my mind, and again, that diffusion, because you are not your mind. So my mind feels like this, and then you label your emotion, because research found that those that labeled their emotion actually diffuse the impact of that emotion. You actually reduce that kind of emotional center from being on overdrive. And then in that connection step, taking time to connect to the body. Would that be, okay, 20-minute walk? Would that be just a micro flex, which is kind of relaxing your shoulders down, unclenching your jaw, taking a belly breath? And in that moment, what you're doing is signaling to your brain through biofeedback that, okay, I am not in a physical danger. There is no physical threat right now. So I can actually tone down, like deregulate my nervous system to take me into the rest and relax. And my prefrontal cortex, that computer side of the brain, can start switching on. The curiosity step is like critical in really helping you navigate that gap between when life doesn't turn out to like how you want it to. Because you actually ask a question, you start to challenge your negative thoughts. And I call negative thoughts, well, I don't, it's called in kind of like psychological terms, automatic negative thoughts. So I call them ants. And our negative thoughts really are like an ant infestation on our brain. They can be such a nuisance. They can be painful, and like one after the other just doesn't stop wriggling around. And there's loads of different automatic thoughts, automatic negative thoughts that can plague our brain, like all or nothing. Like if I don't get this, then this is going to happen. Or fortune telling, like, oh my God, I know things are just going to turn out terribly. Or overgeneralization, like, oh, that happened, then everyone like that is terrible. Or like paralysis by analysis, like, oh my God, what do they mean by that? Does it, if I said this, doesn't mean they don't like me? Like, and I'm the worst at paralysis by analysis, by the way. But when you bring curiosity to the party, you start asking questions like, is this thought true? If I don't get this job, doesn't mean I'm a complete failure. Is this true? Okay, let's go through that. Can I be 100% sure this is true? Well, I can't be 100% sure this is true. If I don't get the job, then I'm going to be a total failure for the rest of my life. I can't be 100% sure. I think it's true, but I can't be 100% sure. How does this thought make me feel? Well, insecure, my worst self, like a just awful, no good, not good enough. Well, who would I be without this thought? That if I don't get this job, I'm a failure. Well, I'd be fine. I'd be happy without the thought. I'd be totally okay. And suddenly we realize through curiosity that it's through our thinking is often the root of our suffering. It's our thinking about something. It's the meaning we place on a meaningless event is what causes our suffering. Oh, and that was someone who really inspired me through all those questions. They're not my questions. They're from Byron Katie, who is this amazing author who I've like followed for years. And then you move into choice and you're like, okay, I may not be able to choose to be happy in this moment, but how can I choose to be kind to myself? How can I choose to treat myself like I would someone I cared about? And I use questions like, what would I advise a friend experiencing what I am now? And the reason I like this is, again, rather than working out of the emotional brain, which is like, what should I do? What should I do? And our emotional brain is activated. When we ask for a friend, we tap into a different part of our brain, the computer side, because we're asking for that rationale, problem-solving part of the brain. And we're able to tap into our wisdom by just using a different question. Then we move into, lastly, commitment. Like, how can I commit to looking for like the growth nugget in this? Like, rather than why is this, asking questions like, why is this happening to me? We switch to, what can I learn from this? What is unfolding? And for me, that was my route to minimizing the gap, from like taking myself out of stiff thinking, taking myself out of conclusions and assumptions, and moving into value-based, compassionate thinking, flexible thinking.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'm literally taking notes here because these are things that I'm going to start doing in the morning myself. So the two things that really speak to me are the connection. So actually labeling your emotions. I don't think I do that enough actually, because I think to myself, oh yeah, I know kind of how I'm feeling, and I know, I'm a bit on edge, or I've got these deadlines and I'm feeling a bit tense, but actually writing it down or labeling it like vividly, I think is really, really interesting. And there is research behind that, like you said, and the whole biofeedback as well. So I did a pod with a friend of mine who's a breath teacher, and immediately he was like, I know you're tense because your shoulders are up here, you're breathing up into your chest, and I'm trying to instigate this in my daily routine. So like every couple of hours, I'm like checking with your breathing, like how are you breathing? I have a standing desk, so generally my posture's okay, but I tend to like breathe up into my chest, and I have apneic episodes when I'm like doing email, like I literally hold my breath. I think it's like quite a well-established phenomenon now. But the labeling thing I think is fantastic, and choosing how you would discuss that emotion with a friend, what advice you would give to someone else, is a really, really great way of practicing self-compassion, because I think we all beat ourselves up, particularly if we're, pretty aspirational, or we feel like, we should be achieving things. That's fantastic. I mean, compiling all of this, you've done a lot of this in your app as well, where I believe step one is like labeling your emotion. Is that right? How was the process of creating that app? Because like we were talking about off air, I'm in the process of creating my app as well. I know how bloody difficult this is. How you kept your head, and this is 3 years ago when you launched yours as well on Android and iOS. What was the process like putting that together? Because it's a beautifully simple app, and I think the mastery of something like that is making it look simple when it's actually very, very complex, and also how you put all this stuff into practice yourself.
Yes, the app was I just really resented everybody telling me when I was stressed to meditate. Because I was like, oh, for Christ's sake, I just don't want to meditate. I've got so much energy right now. The last thing I want to do is sit down and close my eyes and blah. And so I suddenly thought, right, I'm going to, in my like exhaustive state, when I suddenly was like, okay, the only person that's going to get me out of this mess is me, because I got myself into it. My thinking got myself into it. And that's when I am that sort of person. Like when I'm interested in something, I want to turn over every stone. And I then thought, okay, well, surely there must be an app out there that could help you do your kind of mental gym exercises in less than 5 minutes. I could do it on the way to work. I didn't need to close my eyes. I could just do it when I'm in an emotionally hot moment. And so that's when I developed the happiness workout and the sleep wind down. And then we just launched the manifesting workout. And it's just kind of the basics of the science of happiness, the basics of positive psychology. And it is really simple. And writing a grateful diary, again, feels like I'm telling people the sky is blue. But the research on it is amazing. Like after 6 weeks, participants of research studies found their happiness increased by 10%. And you're like, 10%, that's actually quite a lot.
Yes.
Like 10%, like God, if I had an extra 10% at school, it would be like C to an A. And I thought, but we talk about all these things, but knowing me, I'm so disorganized, lose the grateful diary, then be absolutely terrified if someone's reading it. So I thought, well, how do I put this all into an app? And again, I said, this is quite a long time ago. This is like 2016, 2017, which it was all quite new, like Headspace and Calm had just launched. So the app was just this game. How do I turn it into a game? How do I turn the mind into the game? And just like you and what you do with your work, how do we turn this information into something that's actually fun? Because it can get so heavy talking about just a body part that yes, it can be really troubling and can be really challenging, but bringing some degree of like fun and lightness and just bright colors to a conversation was really the mission in changing the brand that mental health had on it prior. But the process of creating the app was so challenging. I remember just thinking to myself, I'm such a fraud. I'm building a happiness app and I'm just so unhappy right now. And there I am, like doing my breathing, I'm doing my grateful diary, and I'm still calling my mother being like, oh my God. But put it this way, like I would have been worse had I not been doing my own app. Yeah. I think that's important to know the limitations of this work. It's absolutely critical. Is it the solution? No, because to your point, what are you eating? How are you moving? Like we can't do anything, just one thing to make ourselves feel healthy and happy. It is just, are we seeing friends? There's just so many inputs that an app can't give you. But I hope that the app was, a great tool just to turn the things we know that are good for us, for our psychological health, into something that was easy to use.
Yeah, totally. I think, the marginal gains of little tools like that do compound over time. And I think we need to, we live in this instant gratification world right now where we feel like we can get everything at the touch of a button. We can get our food delivered to us in 15 minutes. We can have, likes and information at the swipe of a finger. Whereas actually what makes us happy requires time. And you have to put that effort in. Just like I think you've used the analogy yourself. You go to the gym tomorrow, you're not going to be able to run a marathon the next day. You have to really put effort into it. And I think teaching that to the younger generation, as well as reminding the millennial generation, and that's how it should be, is something that your app does really, really well. So and it's brilliant. And like I said, like, you know, it looks simple, but there is a lot of research behind it, because you've engaged neuroscientists, psychologists, you have an incredible expert team as well, with a whole bunch of sessions on it. So it's fantastic, and it's growing as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. It goes to something like 90 million teachers, parents, students, because
Wow.
especially when the brain is that young, it's amazing for kind of like teenagers to just learn these tools, I guess, just to process their day.
Hmm.
So yeah, so it is growing, and it makes me so happy when I've heard the app has been helpful for people, and that is really the kind of that's why I did it. Really, I'm to be honest, it's not my natural skill set to set up businesses, even though I have. Like, it really like took me out of my comfort zone. I'm the worst manager, and just so I really had to kind of like really get to kind of parts of myself that were definitely like not the most natural. But again, I think that's something I learned about happiness, that it's happiness often takes us to really uncomfortable places, but actually through that uncomfortable place is where we find like a really juicy like nugget of happiness afterwards. And definitely the app was like that. It's been some really, really quite like challenging like moments setting up any business. I'm sure anyone who has a business listening to this can agree, like anything can go wrong at any point. But it is really incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna have to ask you for some tips after this, as you know, because
The
Happy
like app
to.
building
is hugely stressful. Just to wrap up, what are you reading right now? Apart from, I'm sure you're not reading your own book. You wrote your own book, but like, what are you reading?
Oh gosh, I'm actually reading so many books. I'm reading this incredible book called Where After, because I'm fascinated in exploring a new meaning of death, which
Hmm.
sounds very odd, but I just think that just in our culture in general, we don't talk about something that is so relevant and prevalent and all around for all of us. And so there's this beautiful book about all these just these anecdotal stories of like what happens like after life. And I mean, I'm quite spiritual in general, but I do think that, you know, Einstein said that energy doesn't die. So I just think it's kind of beautiful to see life as this ongoing energy source, and the fact that our loved ones never really leave us. So that is the book. It's an unusual book, but I really, really I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna check that out. I'm rereading The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari,
Oh,
By
cool.
Robin.
Sharma. Yeah, I was inspired to read it because I read his 5 a.m. book club, no 5 a.m. club, the 5 a.m. club recently, and that really inspired me. So I started waking up at 5 a.m. like every day.
You.
Same.
What do you do
Yeah,
in your
yeah.
hour?
Oh, so I basically I get up, I have like a liter of water.
I
Really?
yeah, yeah.
This is
It's
why his
this.
skin is looking so good, everyone.
So it's something I developed actually when I was a junior doctor, because when you started on the ward round, you weren't drinking water until like 2 p.m. and you know when you'd finish your jobs and everything else. So to counter that, I got into the habit of drinking water, like a lot of water, really early on. I'd need to go to the toilet halfway through the ward round, but that was fine as long as I was hydrated, because I felt that was having an impact on my cognition as well in the afternoon. So yeah, I had my water. I do a meditation, which I'm really religious at. I have to do my exercises because I
What kind of meditation do you do?
so I mix it up. So I have a mixture of transcendental meditation, a mantra based and sometimes I use guided meditations as well. So I've experimented with 3 apps in the past, and I've found that
Sam
Sam
Harris.
Harris. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I feel like
He's
all men I know love Sam Harris.
yeah, yeah. It's just very simple and very stripped back, and
Mm.
I just like, how he punctuates the meditation very, very gently. Whereas I found some others are a little bit too overbearing in terms of their guidance. So, but I've done Headspace, I've done 10% Happier with Dan Harris. I've done some Calm in the past as well. And then I do stretching. So I've had a long-standing back injury since I was 15 when I used to play tennis. I had pars defect. And so every day I have to be very religious about like exercising so I don't have any physical pain. It doesn't debilitate me in any way, but I'm really religious about that. And journaling. So journaling is a relatively new thing that I've been really, really good at for like the last 18 months. I think I started during the pandemic. It's one of the positive aspects, I guess, of the pandemic for me personally is journaling, because it's kind of given me space to write down my feelings and look through my affirmation list, which has been really useful for me. It's a constant list I always go back to. And I don't know, have you spoken to Tara Swart on your podcast?
Yeah. I actually write about her in the last chapter of the book, Flex the Future.
Epic.
She's amazing. She has become like a mentor for me as well over the last year. And ever since I spoke to her, I started my vision board. And so I look at this vision board and it has like my app on it. It has an office. The office is like, it's decorated with lots of greenery. There's obviously a big kitchen in there. There's a big lunch table with everyone who works there who always eats at the same time. There's a whole bunch of other things as well, like, like books and what I want to do in TV and stuff like that. So I'm constantly like training my neural networks to believe that this is going to exist at some point in the future. So yeah, that's what I do in my hour. I love it.
That's a great hour. That's a great hour. Maybe I'll introduce the 8 a.m. club for everyone can have an hour, but just maybe a different. I don't think the 5 a.m. club, but I have actually read that book, and it's really, really, really brilliant book.
Yeah, no, I love it. And the way he talks about awareness and your thoughts being the most important aspect that you have, and how we don't in modern society, obviously your app and your books are obviously trying to counter that, but in modern society I think we throw away our thoughts. We don't really think about taking control of our emotions. So like, a simple example is if you're walking down the street and there's dog poop on the floor, that really annoys me. I've got a little dog. We're very religious about obviously cleaning up after it. And so to see someone else who hasn't taken that initiative and dirtying it and making all dog owners look bad is really annoying. But I'm training myself to not be negatively, I know it's a very small thing, but not be negatively influenced by that, and just think, okay, well, maybe they didn't realize, or maybe they forgot, or maybe they the dog ran away and then they were chasing after them. Give yourself a story that gives a positive accent rather than assuming the worst. And I'm trying to do that in every little element of my day, and I'm finding it really does have an impact on my psychology in a positive way. It's pretty groundbreaking.
Yeah, and also like it's actually kind of selfish to, in a good way, to kind of have these positive like reframes on these like small annoyances, because we actually just create better brain chemistry for ourselves. So we allow ourselves to be annoyed by other people. We're just hurting ourselves. It's like shouting, holding a hot pan. We're the ones getting burnt. So I kind of feel like that movement into whatever, like to your point, like maybe they were busy, maybe they didn't have a bag, or like, we've got no idea what's happening on other people's reality. It's just good for our own brain chemistry from a really selfish point of view.
Yeah. I come back to this commencement speech that was given by David Foster Wallace in 2005.
Oh my God, I wrote about David Foster Wallace in my book.
Honestly, it's one of the most beautiful speeches, and I listen to it a couple of times a year, and every time I find an element of it that I'm like, it literally brings me to tears every time, because there is something in what I just said about the dog poop that he talks about when he goes to, he's like, imagining yourself in a supermarket and you're leaving and there's a big SUV and they're blocking the exit, and you think, oh, they're just like a selfish, fuel guzzling, right wing supporting whatever, but actually maybe they've been in a car accident before and they have to have a big car to feel safe, or maybe they're in a rush because they're taking their kid to the hospital. You know, you to your point, you're tricking yourself into making sure that your brain chemistry is aligned and in balance, rather than assuming the worst in people. And it's really effective. I'm so glad you talked about it. I mean, you've literally taken us through a huge journey through like William James and like Shakespeare and Carl Jung. I'm writing down all these things. I'm going to be writing all this up for the newsletter next week.
Yeah, the other person, and then I would say the other person who's just unbelievable is Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, who I try to read his book like at least once a year, because, you know, like, and flexible thinking was really inspired by him, and his quote kind of, between stimulus and response, that is the space, and within that space is our freedom. And it's just so true. In that space of, okay, seeing the dog poop, in that space of going, let me connect to myself. Let me ask myself a question. Can I choose? How can I commit to having more of an optimistic view of life, for like better brain chemistry? In that space is how we choose our freedom away from little annoyances that just drag us down, make us boring because we're complaining and all of these things. And I think, wow, if we can all take ownership of that space between stimulus and response, to choose our response in a way that we want to live our life, I'm like, wow, that is the road that's not always easy to find, but that's the road to our healthiest, happiest life.
Epic. I mean, that's next on my reading list now, to find Viktor Frankl. I'm going to put links to all of this on the show notes as well. There's going to be a long list of show notes, so that's brilliant. Poppy, you're so inspirational, honestly. To everyone listening to this, I'm sure they're going to be absolutely uplifted by everything you've said. So thanks so much for spending some time with us today, and we'll have to do this again.
Yes, I've loved it. And you've got to come on my podcast. I'm dying to know more about, like, especially food medicine, because something that we don't speak about enough, and it's like basically the foundation of our happiness. So I can't wait to be grilling you next.
Epic.
That was a terrible pun. I didn't even mean it.
That's awesome. Oh, great.